the Africans took very large numbers of white slaves. These were actually captives of war. And the way they were treated, they were so well treated actually, that they became, from among them became rulers. And this went on for 7 generations. They are known as the Mamluk. Mamluk in Arabic really means slaves. That's right. It's the Arabic for slaves. So it's not that white people were never enslaved. No, the white slaves were enslaved in very large numbers, and they became such good Muslims that they were the ones who defeated the Crusaders and who hit them so hard that after that they never came back. I think there were so many crusades, but they were smashed by the Mamluks. So this went on for 7 generations. Now, slavery is of many kinds. But Islam does not allow slavery. This is one problem with the Muslims, why they have become so corrupted, that although in Surah Al-Balad it says clearly, free the slave, I think you quoted that, and that is, one of my friends says that it should be written on the backs of the hands of Muslim children, 90-13. Free the slave. Unless we free the slave, then slaves are not just physical slaves, mental slaves, psychological slaves, emotional slaves. Especially nowadays, there is a tremendous amount of psychological slavery. People are sort of caught in various kinds of phobias and hatred and things that they cannot perform anything right or good. So the white slaves, in my class, remember that mine is the historically black college. So when I brought this idea, not idea, the fact that the Africans took white slaves, my kids or students were outraged because they believed that only Africans were enslaved. But you see, this is a condition of humanity before Islam. And then after Islam, firstly the Prophet said no more slaves, only captives, and you should marry them. They should bring them in. In fact, I have quoted a hadith now in the latest issue of New Trend from the Musnad of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, which is that if you want to help oppressed people and people who are in bad shape and so on, like captives, make them part of your community. So one of the people who was new into Islam, he said to the Prophet, okay, that sounds good, but how will we benefit from that? He said, you know that if you have people like that, they will fight for you when the time comes. So that's what it was, that some of the greatest fighters among the Muslims were captives. And this is where the translators of the Quran, modern translators especially, that I think Mr. Lings is one of the most horrible ones we admire so much about the life of the Prophet. He did not know how to translate Ma malakat imanukum, those whom your right hands possess. Those are captives. Slavery is not allowed in Islam. There is no word for slavery in Islam. The only word was before Islam was abd. You mentioned that, abd, right? Now, abd, the Prophet and Islam and Quran said, Abdullah. You can only be the slave of Allah, not anyone else. So there is no slavery in Islam. But the kings, when they came after the caliphate ended, they used their scholars to say, well, at a certain, didn't think that were there slaves in the time of the Prophet? Now the fact is that, the Prophet's mission lasted for 23 years. In which many things from before Islam continued for a while, like liquor. It wasn't banned outright, riba, it was not banned outright. The women's rights, they were not introduced right away. In fact, you see Surah An-Nisa telling people not to marry those women whom your fathers married. That's how bad things were. So slowly, like muta, temporary marriage, it was banned. In Khaybar, went on till Khaybar, which is in the last years of the Prophet's life. So slavery is not allowed in Islam, but the kings turned ma malakat imanukum, that is captives, into slaves. And women who were captured into it's a very denigrating term in Urdu, londi, means a slave girl. But the Prophet at the Battle of Khaybar had shown that you cannot have laundries, you cannot have slave girls if you have, or captive girls even, if you are a Muslim following the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the captive girl who was captured in the Battle of Khaybar, he married her. And that's how he showed that my Sunnah is you don't have captives. Either you free them for a ransom. If they're women, you can bring them into your community. If they have lost everyone, you know, they used to have total war in those days. If they either won or lost. So you can't have those. But as Caliphate ended, these kings, they brought it back in a new shape. Through their paid scholars who said, yeah, there used to be liquor in the time of the Prophet, didn't ban it outright, that means we can have liquor now? Just think about it. So people who, the trick they play is that they take some things from the hadith of those 23 years, they don't tell you what was the final end of it. Like for example, the rights of women. Are women and men equal? No, women were not equal for a very long time. But then came Surah, what is it called? Tawbah, yes. وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. The believing men and the believing women are each other's protecting friends and guardians. Each other's, not the men of the women, of each other's. And what the Saudis have done is that guardianship. Men are the guardians of the women. So a woman cannot go outside the home without husband's permission. Or drive a car. You know, Saudi is the only country where you cannot drive, a woman cannot drive a car. So this distortion, right? That's why going back to the Quran and focusing on it and the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how we have distorted Islam. Let me give you one final example of this. So there was a woman who did not have proper clothing, and she lived quite far from the masjid of the Prophet. And she said, you know, I really want to come to your masjid to pray and to get all the blessing. All these women go, you know, they, even Isha, you see in Sahih Bukhari, they used to even go at Fajr. I can't go, I don't have the clothing. He said that if you pray inside your home, and even pray in the inside room of your inside of your home, you'll get the same blessing, because your intention is you want to go to the masjid of the Prophet. You will be getting the same blessing. So what did the Saudi scholars do? They took that part. If you pray in the inside room of your inside home, you will get the same blessing at the mosque as going to the mosque of the Prophet. There's no need for women to go to the mosque. Stay in your home. Did the Prophet say you should pray in the inside room? This is how we have destroyed Islam. Half the Ummah, they can't be doing this, or this, or that.